Greetings, Pathfinders, and welcome back to the Absalom Archives. It's time for Part 5 of Rise of the Runelords. Can you believe it? We are so close to the end of this adventure path. So far from the humble beginning of killing goblins at the local festival, we've done so much and experienced so many things together, and it's almost time to begin wrapping things up. But not quite yet. We've still got 2 more books to go, and this adventure has a bit of a different feel from the start than our last few did. When the PCs killed Zanisha in Book 2, we had a clear breadcrumb leading to Turtleback Ferry. When they killed Barl in Book 3, same thing, breadcrumb leading back to Sandpoint for the start of Book 4. Now you might think, we've got that with Karzoug, right? He yelled at the PCs through Makmurian's body, doing a whole villain monologue thing. Obviously that's a breadcrumb, right? Go find that guy and punch him in his punchable bits. Well, no. Being as you are all very smart, I'm sure you can guess that this being book 5 out of 6 means Karzoug isn't going to get killed here. We aren't going to pull a zero miss out of our moon asses, so what might we be doing instead of taking down Mr. Greedy? Well, to understand that, we have to talk about ancient Thessalonian politics. The Runelords didn't get along. Not with each other, not with their subordinates, in some cases hardly even with themselves. But the Thessalonian magic practiced by the Runelords has a kind of weakness built into it. In exchange for greater access to their historical spell school, they are restricted from using 2 opposing historical spell schools. This isn't just a taboo or self-imposed restriction. If they could get away with it, every Runelord would break that as soon as possible. It's not possible for them to cast any of these spells at all. For example, Karzoug can't use any spells associated with the illusion or enchantment historical spell schools, which, funny enough, is the ones associated with the 2 strongest Runelords at the time. So if Karzoug needed anything that would require those 2 kinds of magic, he was kind of out of luck. Recognizing that sometimes, on occasion, just maybe, they might need to work together, the Runelords decided to create a solution. They would need a neutral space where their people could work and collaborate without fear of immediate reprisal from their Runelord. This place couldn't be located in any physical location because it would give the Runelord that controlled that region more power and make them a greater target. So they used their incredible magic powers to create a demi-plane, a pocket of extra-dimensional space which they called the Runeforge. Every Runelord's territory would have a presence here, and each wing would work on projects for their ruler, for Thassalon as a whole, and they'd all be capable of cooperating with one another, in theory. I mean, how long do you think it took for each Runelord to start trying to get an upper hand on one another? A week? 2 weeks top if they had like a full schedule? But the thing about working with a group of paranoid, power-hungry mages is that everyone is on the lookout for everyone else cheating. The Runelords had built protections into the Runeforge that prevented them from interfering or entering the place. Their minions could politic within it, sure, but with 7 factions it would be almost impossible for any one to gain the upper hand. It was honestly a better use of your time to just keep working on your projects and send the Runelord better results. Every once in a while, the system works. But that was all 10,000 years ago. When Thassalon fell, contact with the Runeforge stopped. The demiplane was designed to keep its denizens alive and comfortable so they could continue working indefinitely. No need to eat, no need to sleep, but you would continue aging. But there was no reason to keep working. Thassalon was gone and the Runelords were gone. Once a prestigious laboratory, now it was just an eternal prison for anyone who managed to remain there. But why would Karzoug care about this place now? Well, there's a couple reasons. First, he is to his knowledge the only Runelord currently awake. This is only like half true, but we'll get into that in another video. But his monopoly on being awake means he has a chance to get at the Runeforge like he never had in life. Even if its protections still keep him out, he can send in minions. And secondly, the Runeforge was used to create powerful items and weapons to both support and oppose the other Runelords. It contains secrets Karzoug does not want anyone finding out. But how could anybody find them out? The Runeforge has been sealed tight for centuries, its entrance lost to modern times. Well, this brings us back around to our raid on Sandpoint from earlier in Book 4. Zaliasa, the double agent turned triple agent turned dead guy who we talked about in Book 1, turns out he'd discovered how to enter the Runeforge and Karzoug wanted that information gone for good. Karzoug can't really revive the man himself without wasting incredibly powerful magic to make a wish, and he doesn't really want Zaliasa back, just removed. The corpse would have been dead so long anyway that only a divine miracle could possibly revive him. But here's a fun little twist for you, Zaliasa is alive again. How? Well, when the PCs killed Makmurian at the end of the last adventure, that sent a powerful soul to Karzoug's runewell, which made it flare with power. The Runelord is close to fully awakening now. That flare did the same thing it did 5 years ago, activating all the other runewells. And recall that there's a well in the catacombs beneath Sandpoint. This flare did something the others hadn't, though. It attracted divine attention. Lamashtu, the mother of monsters, sensed the swelling of wrath and turned her attention to her long-dead servant. Using her divine powers, she did what no mortal would be capable of and brought the man back. Not just to life, but infused with divine power. Now a guardian to Lamashtu's shrine, Zaliasa lurks below Sandpoint and makes ready to start sending minions out into the world above. He spends his time writing his mad revelations about Lamashtu on the walls down here, having embraced his new identity as the Scribbler. Now it's time for the PCs to once more return to Sandpoint to find a way to Xin Shalast. Once they arrive back, the PCs will discover that yet another disaster has struck Sandpoint, and it's up to them to solve it in... Part 1. The Scribbler's Rhyme. So the GMs might be wondering how we're going to get the PCs back down into the unexplored catacombs below Sandpoint. Well, good news, may I introduce you to our new friend, Convenient Hole in the Ground. When the rune wells flared up again, the explosion of energy triggered an earthquake, which opened a sinkhole right in the middle of Uptown. It collapsed the back wall of the Sandpoint garrison and has made getting around quite difficult. Oh, and there's also strange noises coming out of the hole at night. You never want strange noise holes in your town, that's just bad ambiance. Does keep the housing prices down though. When the PCs return to town, they are met with a message from Father Xantus. He, Sheriff Hemlock, and Mayor Deverin all meet with the PCs at the cathedral. The three thank the PCs for their work saving the town and bring up the brand new sinkhole. They're loath to ask for more from the group immediately after their return, but the concerns about the hole are pretty bad. The horrible sounds are, not great, and when Sheriff Hemlock sent a group of guards down to investigate, they never came back up. So the sheriff did the only other thing that he could possibly think of, put a rope around it and tell people not to go near it. The PCs do have some leeway if they want to shop or rest, but you should absolutely play up the horrible sounds if you do. Just the worst combination of howls and barks, like a pack of demonic wolves is preparing to hunt for your very soul. Compared to the giant proportions the PCs may have gotten used to from the previous adventure, this hole is kinda basic, only 30 feet wide and 15 feet deep. It's barely a drop for them. If they are worried and want a safe route, they can climb in from the garrison basement jail cells whose walls have collapsed when the sinkhole opened. The rubble and lower elevation make a successful descent practically a guarantee. The only room from the original catacombs level that suffered much damage is the main room here. The rest of the level is clear and the stairs leading down are now accessible. This isn't because of the cave-in, but rather the result of Zaliasa and his minions clearing the way to the surface. And speaking of Zaliasa, let's talk about him. He's been revived as something called the Divine Guardian, a creature chosen by a god or goddess to guard a place sacred to them. They get a great deal of magical power, but are bound to that place they are meant to guard. As such, Zaliasa can't actually leave these ruins, though anything he summons or recruits can. Within the ruins, though, he can freely teleport around, so pinning him down to a single room is incredibly hard. The good news is that he's interested in talking to the PCs so he can learn more about the modern world. He'll ask questions and is willing to answer back in exchange. Most of his questions concern what happened to Thassalon, who rules the modern world, and if Karzoug and Elasmist are still around. His new powers means he doesn't fear Karzoug's immediate retaliation, so he isn't too worried to find out the Runelord seems to be around, if not fully free yet. If the PCs ask about defeating Karzoug, Zaliasa gives a coy response, speaking of the Runeforge as a place they created but couldn't control. He'll brag about discovering the location and how to enter it, but won't freely give up that information, though he will slip that it's hidden down here somewhere. After a while, though, the Scribbler gets bored and feels he's learned enough. He'll declare that the time for talk is finished, the time for action is now. And this guy is going to be a pain to fight. As I said, he's able to teleport around down here with no limits. He possesses high-level cleric spells, including summoning and healing, and has skin hard enough to block anything less than adamantine. He's also very effectively fortified the shrine down here. Every door is disguised behind an illusion that makes it look like an ordinary wall and locked away by magic. The entire complex is filled with vision-reducing fog, and every intersection attempts to confuse the PCs into turning around or taking a wrong turn. The shrine also isn't entirely empty either. He's summoned two allies to aid him. The first is a powerful demon called the Glabrizu, a treachery demon. The creature was sent by Lamashtu when the Scribbler called for an ally as proof of her approval. It's bound to obey Zaliasa and guard the shrine. Together, he and the Scribbler make for a very deadly combination. In a partly collapsed chamber here, the second of the Scribbler's conjured allies is a pack of powerful Yeth hounds called the Hounds of Lamashtu. Bigger and more deadly than their lesser cousins the PCs encountered in Thistletop, these are the source of the howls the town has been hearing at night, along with the Scribbler occasionally joining in with loud, incoherent rants, presumably just for fun. They've eaten most of the guards from the town that ventured down here, to the point where the bodies are nothing but cracked bones and equipment. The only exception is the body located here, which the Scribbler has taken to interrogating using magic. It's also preserved by magic, so the PCs can rescue at least one of the ill-fated group that made their way down here. The complex here is covered in Zaliasa's writings, most of them rambling about Lamashtu. However, scattered throughout the complex are stanzas of a poem the PCs can use to discover how to get into the Runeforge. Have fun hunting those down. That final room also contains the writing that roughly constitutes the Scribbler's plans for the future, which involves sending minions to raid the Runeforge for treasure. Chief among them are something he calls Runeforge weapons, which he believes would be particularly effective in combating the Runelords. Now here's the Scribbler's poem, presented in full. The first stanza is just an intro, but the second begins the instructions to find the Runeforge. It talks about a steaming mirror, which is actually a hot spring lake in Varesia called Lake Stormunder. The 7 faces refer to a mysterious circle of stone heads on the eastern shore of the lake near a mountain called Rimeskull. According to the third stanza, each head needs to have a spell of their appropriate historical spell school cast on it, at which point a key will be revealed. Take all 7 keys and ascend the slope of the mountain. Per the 4th stanza, up the mountain you'll find a second ring of statues. Use the key on the correct statue and the door will open, allowing access to the Shrine of the Silver Monkey. The Runeforge. Sorry, channeled a little bit too much Kirk Fog there. Once the Scribbler is slain, the supernatural dangers of the shrine are gone, leaving only the practical issues presented by a giant sinkhole. The PCs can return to Sandpoint proper to rest and relax for just a moment. If they need time to solve the riddle of the Scribbler, local scholar Broderick Quink can provide some assistance. Magic that reveals hidden information can also help, though it can't reveal the Runeforge directly. The structure's wards prevent that kind of thing. At this point, the PCs are free to pursue the Runeforge lead whenever they're ready. At this level, unless you're playing with a particularly low magic party, travel to Lake Stormunder is trivial to arrange. Even if you're 4 fighters and a rogue, the only complication for the journey should be figuring out the time it takes to get there, so we'll fade back in with... Part 2, Seeking the Runeforge. When the PCs arrive at the lake, they'll find the circle of stone statues just as described. Each one depicts the Runelords who ruled Absalom when it fell. They are arranged in this order: Karzoug, Kroon, Belmarius, Sorshan, Zandergul, Alasnist, and Zutha. Each head holds a key in their mouth, but just opening the head isn't enough to get it. The keys have all been shifted to the ethereal plane, and shifting them to the material universe requires the correct spell to be cast. Any spell works so long as it matches the historical spell school of the Runelord in question. The heads completely absorb the casting, so effects that might be dangerous to the PCs if they're close by don't need to be worried about. Feel free to fireball Alasnist, believe me, she deserves it. Once a statue is properly activated, it makes a horrible noise as the mouth opens and the key is revealed. The first time this happens, things get a little complicated. See, Rimeskull has long been the lair of Arcist, an ancient white dragon. A legendary figure in the region, his frequent raids on the local Shawanti stopped around 200 years ago, and many had hoped that he'd finally died. However, nope, he was just sleeping. And the PCs just set off his alarm clock. As the group continues their work, Arcus shakes off his sleep and climbs out to see them. Assuming they're meddling adventurers here to kill him, because most people are, the dragon will fly down to attack, spending the time it takes flying there casting magic on himself. The dragon is old and cunning, keeping to the air and using his speed, spells, and breath weapon to their fullest. But the PCs are more powerful than when they fought Longtooth and more prepared for this kind of foe. Arcus will retreat once things look like they're turning against him. Ironically, his lair is exactly where the PCs need to go, so even if they avoid waking him up with creative ways to get the keys, they'll still meet him eventually. If confronted in his lair and clearly losing, the dragon will retreat to the sky to fight another day. This could actually be very bad for the PCs because the way they're going to get into the Runeforge is a portal that's going to remain open, so once the PCs go through, so can the dragon. Feel free to have him return at the worst possible time if he does escape, it'll be very funny. So once they get all the keys, heading up the mountain is pretty easy. Once inside the cave, the PCs see both the described statues as well as Arcist's horde. If the dragon retreated here, he will be hiding in a side tunnel, smart enough to realize this is a bad place to confront the PCs. He will seethe and rage if they loot his horde, but control himself enough to wait for them to leave. When they do open that portal, he'll give it a few minutes before following. Activating the portal is as simple as putting the keys in the statues and turning them twice. Activation order doesn't matter. The keys disappear once used, returning to the original statues by the lake, and the statues here glow for 1 hour. Once all 7 are activated, the 7-foot wide portal appears, leading into a hallway, and the PCs may finally enter into... Part 3, the Runeforge and the Abjurant Halls. Alright, so we are finally at the Runeforge, and this place is a first for us. Previous locations had a few different routes the PCs could take, but this one is entirely non-linear. The PCs emerge into a central location, the Runeforge Pool. This pool of water is important for making use of the Runeforge to its fullest. Surrounding the pool are 7 statues depicting the 7 Runelords. These statues were actually how the workers reported to their masters, we'll see more of that later. This pool is a central location, and the Runeforge branches into separate halls for each Runelord's minions. The halls can be explored in any order depending on what the players want to do. And that's an important thing to keep in mind about this part. From here on, the PC's stay in the Runeforge is self-directed. There's no reason they can't decide at any point to just be done and try to leave. They'll lose out on treasure, experience, and information if they do, but that's their decision to make. It can help to keep in mind the following 2 objectives to dangle in front of a group that isn't immediately taken by the Runeforge. First, they need information on Karzoug and Zinshalast. This is one of the only untouched sources of information on Absalom available. The second is those things they heard about from Zalias's writings, the Runeforged weapons. As I mentioned, Thessalonian magic works on a principle of opposition. In essence, a normal wizard's power is spread out throughout the entire spectrum of magic, through every historical spell school. Thessalonian magic concentrates the power of one school by effectively shutting off contact with the 2 opposing ones. The Sihedron represents this, with the specifically attuned school as the ascending point of the star, and the 2 opposing schools as the bottom 2 points. If you're familiar with how the color wheel in Magic represents opposed colors, it's the same basic idea. So by using reagents associated with the two opposed schools, it's possible to magically enchant a weapon for combat against the magic users associated with the primary school. Greed is associated with transmutation, so that means you'll need a reagent associated with illusion and enchantment, associated with the sins of envy and lust. I'll bring up where each reagent is in each of the halls in case the PCs want to make Runeforge weapons for other sins. The adventure gives no reason to do this, but it's nice to have the info and the options. So with those two things in mind, it's my opinion that the PC should explore at least 3 halls. The Envy and Lust halls for reagents to make Runeforge weapons, and the Greed hall to get information on Karzoug. The other 3, well technically 4 but we'll get into that in a minute, have useful information and treasure, but if the PCs are tired of the Runeforge, you can easily cut them out. Now there's one other thing to go over before we get started. The Runeforge has a number of, let's call them, environmental properties. The biggest one is that the Runeforge sustains everyone inside via magic, removing the need to eat, sleep, and drink while inside. Probably also takes care of waste disposal too, though the book doesn't explicitly say that. Aging still happens though, and we'll talk about how that affects the denizens on a case-by-case basis. These effects also keep the air inside relatively fresh, even though the place is completely enclosed. Speaking of that, since this place is in another dimension, a lot of magic will interact with the PCs strangely. They aren't on their home plane anymore, so they can be forced out of this place or leave via spells like Plane Shift. This is not the case for any of the denizens of the Runeforge. Even those originally from other planes like the Outer Rifts have been here for so long they now consider the Runeforge their home. Finally, each hall is attuned to the sin that it embodies. This isn't just for spellcasters, but for anyone who seems to exemplify that sin. In previous videos, I recommended GMs keep track of their players' actions and how they embody certain sins and virtues. If you haven't been doing that, don't worry, you can probably get away with just guessing based on what you remember, or even discussing it with your PCs. When in the wing of their particular sin, that PC feels welcome and invigorated, while the opposing wings feel oppressive and stifling. If this feels like too much to keep track of, feel free to omit this aspect from the PCs. Its effect on the NPCs has already been factored into the adventure. Now we're going to go through the halls in the order the book presents, which means we should address the elephant in the room. 6 locations clearly spread out deeper into the Runeforge, but the Abjurant halls have suffered a lot of damage. The reason for this is, in fact, Karzoug. When Absalom fell and the Runelords went dormant, their magical connection to the Runeforge pool dimmed and it became less effective. The various halls all retreated to their areas and have mostly kept to themselves. Of course they schemed and plotted against each other, but plots also mean risk, and no one had a reason to take that risk. Then Karzoug started waking up, and that powered up the Runeforge pool. Now there was something worth risking. The Abjurant Hall workers made the first move, and the others retaliated. The Wrath Hall in particular reveled in the ability to start a fight, and this wing ultimately ended up destroyed. While the rooms still have a few surprises, the most important thing in the Abjurant Halls is here. This room contains a substance that the wizards have called Ethyllion. A metallic-looking liquid, properly prepared Ethyllion could drain the magic from an item, storing it for use in liquid form. It could enhance spells associated with abjuration and assist in the creation of magic items. All the Ethyllion in this room has already been charged, so putting a magic item in it just gets that item wet. Charged Ethyllion is the Runeforge component associated with abjuration. With that all done, let's move on to our first proper hall, Part 4, the Ravenous Crypts. Pop quiz! What would be the biggest issue a necromancer-based wing would face when Absalom fell? Personally, I would have guessed can't dimension DoorDash a bunch of McZins anymore, but the correct answer is no more corpses coming in. The thing about undeath is that you can't really do much of a lateral transformation. If you raise someone as a zombie, you can't just re-kill them and get a ghast or a white out of it. At best, you can get a ghost and a corpse per person. No matter how efficient you are, eventually raw material runs out. Of course, the obvious action is to obtain material from other halls, but trying to do that by force didn't work out. Their defenses were just too strong. So the wizards here calmly and rationally made the decision to brutally cannibalize and destroy each other. The end result was a single lich named Azaven winning out and becoming the ruler of these halls. However, the lack of resources for practical experimentation means his work has largely stagnated. The lich succumbed to centuries of torpor, but he's recently been invigorated. The war with the Abjurant Halls has provided Azaven with a surplus of new materials, and he's been engaged in a relative flurry of activity. The walls of the Ravenous Crypt are suffused with profane magic, empowering the undead here. It also suffuses the walls with wraiths, which will pour out and attack anyone living if the walls are damaged somehow. The first room doesn't contain much, just some mummies, but one of those mummies is telepathically linked to Azaven, which means that as soon as the PCs enter the hall, the lich knows that some new meat has come into his domain. Moving along, this room contains the power source for the entropic energies flowing through the hall. 2 crystal pylons channel the powerful energies of the void, a plane of negative energy that is the opposite of life, into a portal. This portal doesn't allow physical travel, it just allows the ambient energy of the void to leak through. It's not that harmful to stand by, but touching any part of it will hurt a living creature and drains the life from them. Undead and anyone with void healing instead regains that health. Destroying this setup removes the wraiths from the wall and the bolstering effects on the local undead. Which is definitely a good idea. Nothing bad can come from destabilizing a portal into the negative energy realm. Try it today! Now back here, we have a research station that's largely been unused for centuries and 2 hallways going left and right. Heading left first, up here is a laboratory belonging to Zyodin Zeriak. No, he isn't part of Organization 13, he's just from ancient Thassalon. In life, he was the patriarch of the extinct Zeriak family, notable for being super cannibalistic. Absalom has raised him as an advanced kind of ravenous zombie to act as a laboratory assistant and companion. Zyodin is currently taking advantage of the fresh corpse from the Abjurant halls, working on a wizard from there whose body was magically enhanced in a way that resists necromancy. Absalom wants the whole corpse studied meticulously, rewarding Zyodin's work by letting him eat pieces of the body once it's been catalogued. Zyodin also has a telepathic connection with Absalom. If either are aware of the PCs, they'll be in constant communication. This means that even if the PCs defeat the zombie, his Lich Master will have a good idea of their capabilities. Absalom, meanwhile, can be found down here, in his personal research room. He can be found sitting at the desk working, the picture of unbothered. He'll look like this even if he knows the PCs are invading, in part because of curiosity. He'll interrogate the PCs about the outside world, wondering why someone would come into the Runeforge now. However, he isn't patient or indulgent, and will swiftly decide the PC's information can be extracted better through necromancy than through conversation. Liches are dangerously powerful spellcasters, in part because of the ability to regenerate from their soul jars. Absalom's is stored in this hidden room, along with his personal treasures. This room is trapped, but I won't tell you how. Absalom does take a while to reform, so unless the PCs stick around the Runeforge for a week, defeating him removes him from the board even if they don't find or destroy his soul jar. But what about the runeforging component from Gluttony in this wing? Well, that's actually found all the way back here. The realm of Gluttony, Gastash, had 4 great houses. Each house produced something consumable by the realm and was lauded for their excessive consumption. We touched on the Zeriak family and their cannibalism, but the other 3 were more mundane. The Gorian were cheesemakers and butchers, while the Anstrin were confectioners. But the important one for us is the Inib. Vinters by trade, they entrusted the Ravenous crypts with their patriarch's body and had him stored with several of their finest wines and a construct for a guardian. None of this stopped Absalom from taking that body when he needed new material, but the wine was left behind. Still preserved by the Runeforge, it's quite good, but also serves as the reagent from the crypts. Now that we've whet our appetite, it's time to move on to one of the 3 relevant halls. Part 5, the Vault of Greed. Karzoug staffed the Runeforge with some of his most powerful followers, who worked hard to create many great things for their Runelords' use. Their leader was Izomendakis, one of the most powerful wizards in the Runeforged halls. If Karzoug could make contact with him again, he'd have a powerful ally ready to help the Runelords return to the world. Good thing that guy's dead! Along with pretty much everyone else in here, Izomendakis died during the battle for the Runeforge pool along with most of the other senior wizards from this hall. The apprentices left over scrabbled and struggled for power, with a man named Ordicon winning out as the only survivor. Ordicon has managed a powerful feat of transmutation, turning his entire body into mithril. This has quite a few advantages, but also some nasty side effects. Outside of studying and remembering magic, Ordicon's mind isn't the most stable or receptive to memory anymore, so he's not a reliable source of information on anything, but especially not Thassalon. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Upon entering the halls, the PCs are greeted with an ornate door, locked and with no handle. This is a trap. The door is entirely fake and simply shoots out of the wall, slamming into the opposite side. Deadly for anyone between the two. The actual door is disguised as the wall ahead of the party. Heading down the hallway, we have a more dangerous trap. A door slamming into you can easily be healed. A mist in the hallway, though, that does something much worse. It turns you into a goldfish. It also teleports anyone affected by it away from that area and into one of the 4 pools all around. If the entire party fails their saves, this would at least make for an interesting, if anticlimactic, total party kill. Be aware that this mist doesn't work on greedy people, so a PC who embodies that sin just might be the group's salvation. Each of these 4 fountains contains a statue that is actually a construct meant to guard them. Activating one activates all of them, and each one will converge on the room where the first construct was activated. Destroying these constructs is highly beneficial since it weakens the transforming mist, removing it entirely if all 4 fail. That has the added effect of undoing the goldfish transformation if any of the PCs failed their saves. The other goldfish in the fountain can be normal or other transformed people as you wish, depending on how complex you want to make things. Moving back to the entrance for a moment, the fountain here doesn't have goldfish. This fountain connects to the plane of water and is the source of every other fountain via magic. For some unknown reason, the portal also attracts elemental water scamps, who emerge to frolic here on occasion. As creatures, they are no threat to the PCs, but they could make for an interesting if irritating source of information. Ordicon comes through and clears them out every few days, and these scamps really don't like him. They can provide information on him, as well as telling the PCs that the 4 goldfish fountains are connected and that there is more magical water located deeper in the complex. Now the PCs can find Ordicon here, where he's trying to find a way to create more mithril creatures. He isn't having much success, with several live animals kept for experimentation. Now you might wonder where he managed to get those animals. He actually found small vermin from a different hall and transmuted them into their current forms. Which is better or worse? I kinda flip-flop on it, honestly. Ordicon will fight hard, but if facing death, will teleport to the final room where he makes his last stand. Now before the PCs can reach that room, they have to go through this one, which contains an interesting encounter. Zuvuzeg is a powerful boar demon called an Alfeshni. He's been bound to this area for centuries after making a deal with his Omendakis. The demon would be bound to these halls until it could tell a story that made his Omendakis laugh, cry, shriek, and cheer with his stories. Prior to the wizard's death, the demon had achieved a laugh, a cry, and a cheer. Unfortunately, the dead don't shriek, and reviving his Omendakis is nearly impossible at this point, so the demon is bound to this place forever. Until some interesting outsiders come calling, that is. Zuvuzeg sees the PCs as his best chance to finally escape, and will promise them a great reward if they can free him from the binding spell that keeps him here. Doing so isn't impossible, but maybe more or less difficult depending on the party. Remember, Zuvuzeg treats the Runeforge as his home plane, so you can't just banish him. By the way, his reward is simply not killing the PCs, which I'm sure they will just love. If he is freed, he'll stalk the Runeforge looking for a way out, which could make for an interesting NPC, ally, or enemy, depending on what you want to use. This last room contains a powerful magic pool, which the wizards from this hall were trying to turn into a second private Runeforge pool. They didn't succeed, but they did create a pool of water that infuses magic into items immersed in it. This water only functions like that while it's in this pool, but the extracted water does serve as a Runeforge crafting reagent. While the water pool is useful, the most important thing to take from this hall is the research in Ordicon's room. The Mithril Mage's own stuff is too fragmented and unfinished to be of much use, but the notes from other mages that remain here are a different story. Scattered information about Karzoug's massive rune well can be found here, along with his intended plan for surviving Earthfall. It doesn't paint the whole picture, since the rune well was constructed elsewhere, but it can give the PCs a glimpse into the scope of Karzoug's true power. But that's all for the Vault of Greed. Oh, you were wondering about all the fabulous wealth and treasure you could find in here? Well, there might be some, but most of the opulence in here was transmuted and maintained by the Vault. Taking it out just turns it into worthless rocks. Hope you weren't too attached to those gems and jewels, because it's time for our next stop on the Tour of Sins, Part 6, The Iron Cages of Lust. Okay, so before I start cracking jokes, we need to get serious for a second. This section deals with lust and contains sexual themes. Some aspects of that might be disturbing for some players, and GMs should be very careful when running this section. I'm not going to go too in-depth into much of what's going on here, so I don't think I need that much of a trigger warning for it, but I did want to comment on it. Now that we've gotten that taken care of, it's time to head into the Iron Cages of Lust. Really get in there, nice and deep. What, was that joke a little too ham-fisted? Well, it won't be the only thing fisted around here. Sorry. It's hard not to show restraint when talking about this place. I guess I just wasn't meant for bondage. The Iron Cages is probably the least complex you'll find in the Runeforge. It's really one big cathedral room. The middle of the room has a large pavilion of silk set up, while the rest of the room is just full of pillars carved to resemble Runelord Sorshan. All around the outside are the titular Iron Cages. Most of them are empty, 4 contain long-dead corpses, and 1 contains a living person. Now, the Iron Cages have a unique property in the Runeforge. Anyone in here stops aging at adulthood as long as they remain inside. That last bit is the kicker, because once they leave for any other part of the Runeforge, the passage of time catches up and the body will age to dust. Now, the living person here is named Nelavetu Voan, and he's in bad shape. He's been kept here and tortured by the other denizens of the Iron Cages for centuries. He lives in a cage and is treated like a dog, so his mind isn't really together anymore. It's possible for the PCs to restore him with magic, but that might not be as nice a gesture as you think. He's been dealing with this for 10,000 years, and sanity might just be a new form of torture. He can also never leave this place without crumbling to dust, so it's debatable whether you want to leave him around, take care of him, or take care of him, if you get what I mean. More immediately relevant and dangerous are 4 demons: Eryala, Leylin, Voivod, and Zevashala. And I thought moms who named their kid Caitlin were bad. Does that joke work if you can't see how I spelled it? Use your imagination and every vowel you can think of, you'll get the gist. Anyway, these 4 are Alu demons, the children of a succubus and a mortal, typically a human. When the PCs enter, these 4 will fly around and alternate between flirting with and mocking the party. They won't attack unless the PCs make a hostile move towards them, interact with any of the cages, or move to enter the pavilion. The entire time, though, they will be communicating with their mother, a succubus named Delvine. Delvine originally worked with the wizards in charge of this wing, but betrayed and broke them shortly after Earthfall. Her original plan had then been to return to the Outer Rifts after she was done, but she couldn't. After a few centuries of venting frustration, she decided when life gives you lemons, you make someone lick them for your own gratification. As an immortal, she can freely leave the iron cages and has done so often throughout the years, meeting and charming various denizens of the other halls. Their help has allowed her to reshape this wing to its current shape. It also means she knows a good bit about the other wings, especially the Pride one. Speaking of which, we haven't covered that one yet, since this book tackles the halls in the alphabetical order of their sins. By the by, it took me until I was writing this script to realize that, don't tell anybody. But the PCs can go in whatever order they want, so it's possible they've already gone to the Pride wing. We'll cover most of that in the Pride section, but it does mean if the PCs went there first, they could have a less hostile meeting with Delvine. Entering into Delvine's pavilion will bring a familiar sight, some stone giants. These particular giants have been in the Runeforge for so long they no longer remember anything of the outside world. As far as they know, there are no other creatures like them in the world. They've been repeatedly charmed by Delvine so many times their devotion has basically become genuine. It's extremely unlikely the PCs will take Delvine by surprise since her Alu demon children are in constant telepathic communication with her. But if they do surprise her or enter her chambers without explicit permission, the succubus is enraged by the disrespect. She'll attack the PCs and call for backup from the giants and her daughters. If it looks like she's gonna die, she will use her teleportation magic to flee the iron cages entirely. It does make sense, the layout of her realm doesn't really leave many places to hide. Now, if the PCs secure an audience, she'll ask them about the other wings they visited, and if they bring news from Pride, she'll be quite appreciative. As a reward, she'll allow the PCs to take some of her toys with them on one condition. Now, I know why some of you would want them, but there is an actual practical reason to want them as well. These personal use items are the lust reagent for making a Runeforge weapon, and the PCs will need a lot of those to create a weapon specifically suited to fighting Karzoug. And what's her condition? She just wants one of the PCs to accompany her for some private time. Now before you all shout wood, it's the kind of private time that will leave you completely drained of levels and energy and nothing else. Which will be fatal for the PC she picks, just to be clear. If you still wanna, well, I mean, you've been warned enough, consequences are on you. Once the PCs have dealt with Delvine, in whatever way they choose to, they can move on from the iron cages. Though I'd recommend sanitizing anything you got from here pretty thoroughly. At which point, we can move on over to Part 7, The Shimmering Veils. Question for you, can you ship of Theseus a person? The Shimmering Veils offers us a look into how you just might be able to accomplish that. During Thassalon's time, Vrazaris was the hand-picked apprentice of Xandergul, known for his exceptional intelligence and loyalty. As the years went on, Vrazaris maintained eternal life through magical cloning. The process wasn't entirely self-sustaining, each new clone of Vrazaris would come to life a little weaker than the one it replaced, meaning he would need to regain that strength with each new life. Not impossible, but it did require investment, time, and effort. This proved a problem when the Runeforge pool activated. Like everyone else, he fought off the Abjurant Hall's attack, then got to pondering the implications of what was happening. As the only original apprentice still alive, he was the only one who managed to figure out it was a result of Karzoug's awakening. This actually pissed him off quite a bit. It should have been Xandergul, damn it! So he poured his time and energy into finding a way out of the Runeforge so he could destroy Karzoug himself and work to free Xandergul. Could he have actually done it? Well, maybe. His improved version of Clone is a 9th rank spell, so he would have had to have been at least 17th level to cast it. He would also have knowledge of Thassalon and Karzoug that others wouldn't, as well as a relative element of surprise. But he also lacked a lot of allies in the outside world to assist him, so it's kind of a toss-up. But it doesn't really matter, because before he could finish regaining his strength and preparing his most recent clone, Vrazaris succumbed to a hereditary degenerative disease. It caused him to slip into dementia rapidly, becoming unable to distinguish between reality and his own illusions. He died before he could make a new clone, unable to see his lord's return. Now upon entering the halls, one of the deadlier traps in the entire dungeon triggers. These hallways are lined with mirrors, so each one of them does that trick where if you have two mirrors directly opposite of each other, they reflect infinitely, which is of course trippy as hell, but not deadly. Except, positioned across from one another at both ends of the hallway are two items called Mirrors of Opposition. Anytime someone looks at their own reflection in the mirror, an exact duplicate of them emerges and attempts to destroy that person. And since the mirrors are reflecting each other, if you look into one of them, you look into both. And this can happen 4 times before the mirrors run out of juice, by the way. And I don't know about your groups, but I tend to see the toughest PCs taking point in these kinds of missions. Imagine fighting 2 exact copies of your party's barbarian, fighter, or champion. Now imagine you didn't realize why this happened, and when looking for the source, you trigger the mirrors again. But once the party is done beating themselves off, no, I didn't get my fill in the lust section, thank you very much, they'll find themselves here, in a large cathedral dedicated to the peacock spirit. Inside here, the PCs will find Vrexus. 6 of him, in fact. Prior to perfecting and enhancing his clone, the wizard used another spell called Simulacrum to create copies of himself. These copies don't degrade and age like a clone, but they are less powerful and can't become stronger or accept his soul after he dies. The magic that created them is just too limited in that regard. They make excellent assistants though, especially since all the mortal apprentices died centuries ago. Now they mostly just stand around, obeying their last order that the master is not to be disturbed. So upon seeing the PCs, they'll do their best to murder them quietly. The door to the rest of the complex is hidden, but good news! Even if the PCs don't find it, the reagent they need from the wing can be found here in this hall. All the walls here are mirrored, like the hallway, and while breaking them might be bad luck, those shards are the components the PCs need. Now if they do find the door and move on, the next room contains Vrexus, specifically his corpse, and a variety of books. Most of them are about the peacock spirit and are written in a vague and hard to understand manner. A lot is said, but little can actually be understood if you get what I mean. The wizard's personal journals are a little bit more helpful. Written in Thessalonian, they talk about his improved clone spell, his discovery of Karzoug's awakening, and his plans to enchant Runeforge weapons for his chosen agents to defeat the Runelord. He even tells the PCs what components they need to use. This is really good if you or your party don't want to bother with all the other halls. You have a concise list of what you need, why you need it, and where to get it. Nice and simple. As for the rest of this hall though, there's not a massive amount of things here. The room here is a laboratory and library that Vrexus destroyed in a fit of lucid rage when he realized he wasn't going to be able to finish his clone in time. The rooms here and here are filled with the previous clone bodies that Vrexus just couldn't destroy for some reason. He was a little bit too proud of his work, I guess. Probably the second creepiest thing he did. The creepiest is in this room, which was his personal quarters. The room is incredibly plain because he preferred to decorate using illusion spells rather than physical objects. There are also 6 simulacra copies of Delvine in here, which he used to entertain himself. While he was certainly interested in Delvine physically, he didn't much care for her personality, so all 6 copies don't really act like the real thing. They will attack the PCs on sight unless they somehow have the real Delvine with them. The confusion this causes makes all 6 act very erratically while she's in sight. Speaking of Delvine, this is where she will teleport if the PCs are winning the fight against her. Her plan was to ask Vrexus for help, but she's hit with the 1-2 punch of finding his inferior copies of her and his corpse. She'll use her magic to make herself look like Vrexus and wait here for the PCs, so the copies will obey her orders. If the PCs don't approach or leave the Runeforge before finding her here, she'll eventually destroy these copies once they are no longer useful, because dang are they creepy. And that's all there is to the Shimmering Veils. At this point, the PCs have everything they need to create a Runeforge weapon to combat Karzoug and his minions. If they feel done, you can definitely skip to part 10 for the conclusion of the adventure. But as I said before, these sections are only sorted alphabetically, so it's entirely possible your group has already headed to one of the other 2 sections we haven't covered yet. So we'll go over the more gross of those 2 options now with Part 8, The Festering Maze. The conjuration halls weren't built to be a fetid sewer, but that's what they've become. The air-refreshing magic of the Runeforge barely manages to keep this place breathable. These halls are crawling with vermin that are occasionally used by the other denizens as experimentation fodder, but are otherwise left alone. As far as the rest of the place goes, there's one living creature, though that's a bit of a stretch to call him that. Jordamandus was the last of the wizards left alive in this hall, and for a little while was actually pretty productive. He obtained a powerful heart of living slime, which keeps him immortal so long as he stays in his current room. However, the slower beating of his heart and the lack of any need to eat or sleep or really do anything at all has amplified his sin of sloth greatly. He does little more than sit and wait, occasionally plotting but doing little else. So for navigating the Festering Maze, the PCs have 2 options. Some of the area is clear enough to walk on, though this land is slippery and difficult to traverse. The water has a range of depths from shallow near the walkways to 10 feet deep at some parts. It's also incredibly dirty, gross and foul beyond anything seen on the mortal planes. And that is quite literally true, as the PCs can fully discover in this room. Long ago, the 3 pipes here connected to the plane of water. But after all the other wizards died, Jordamandus rerouted them. They now connect to a part of the outer rifts called the Undersump, home to a demon named Jubilex. Quick meta note here, this demon lord is based on one from D&D and is no longer part of the setting after the remaster. If you want to be current canon compliant, you'll need to replace him somehow. My suggestions would either be the demon lord Seath Vasug or the Clipoth lord Org Ung. Or add your own Uzi demon lord, I'm not your mom. Whomever you pick, that's who Jordamandus serves and who gave him his slime heart. Now this room also contains the control for the pumps and tunnels in this area. The lever on the left is currently up and controls the grates in the tunnels throughout the maze. Lowering it will open those and make traversing through a lot easier for the PCs. The middle lever, which is currently down, controls the portals. Lifting it closes them and stops the flow of horrible gunk into the area. Jordamandus knows if this happens and immediately begins scrying on the location and preparing for the worst. The final lever on the right is in the up position and activates a cleansing cycle. This unleashes a huge blast of water from the ceiling above the center of the room. This isn't enough to actually clean the maze, not even close, but if the PCs turned off the pipes, it does very slightly marginally kinda sorta help. Though it also brings a pissed off water elemental, so pick your poison there. Speaking of pissed off creatures, 2 slimy demons called Omox also lurk in this room. These demons occasionally wash in from the outer rifts and bum around the maze for a while. If the PCs shut off the portal and it's then turned back on, either by the PCs or by Jordomandus minions or familiar, the buildup of pressure from the other side pulls a few more of them in. They aren't specifically allied with Jordomandus, but they serve the same master and will likely work with him should they come into contact. Though it's more likely they'll just fight the PCs out of pure desire to murder things. Now the Festering Maze does have a low point where all the gunk flows, and it's this room here. Inside it are two very strange creatures called Chernobus. They are Clipoths, the creatures that inhabited the farthest part of the outer rifts and predate the creation of demons. Pulled in here a long time ago, these two can actually freely leave the Runeforge with their own magic and often do so, heading into the material universe to spread pain and do horrible things. This room is more like a lair or vacation home for them. When the PCs arrive, they are simply laying in the filth, relaxing in the home away from home. They'll fight to the death, alerting Jordomandus of the PC's approach simply through the noise they make. And lastly, the wizard himself is here. He cannot leave this room, as his immortality relies on the 4 pools present in the corner, each of which is filled with one of the 4 humors in alchemy: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. These pools aren't just stagnant body goop, no, that would be gross but easy. Instead, they are living oozes capable of reaching out and afflicting people with horrible conditions, or just dissolving you. Jordomandus needs to be in the presence of all 4 in order to keep his slime heart working. If all 4 oozes are killed, he has at most a week to live. Even if he had the drive, it's kind of a toss-up on if he could fix them, and the man is so unmotivated, not even death stirs him to act fast enough. Now honestly, while you can fight him, Jordomandus is not a threat. Okay, I mean, yeah, he is mechanically a threat. He's a 15th level wizard who specializes in summoning monsters. His fight could be very brutal. But as a person, he's content to just live in this room forever. If the PCs decide he's not worth fighting, his slothful nature means he's kinda stuck just being momentarily mad about it. Yeah, he can summon creatures to attack the PCs, but the highest level ones he can summon only last about 15 rounds, aka a minute and a half. Long in combat, sure, but once the PCs leave the maze, they can effectively outrange the duration of his spells. In a way, I think this makes him one of the better roleplay NPCs. So long as the PCs aren't hostile to him, I doubt he cares much about them fighting slimes in his tunnels. He spent a lot of time scrying on the other denizens of the Runeforge and can give the PCs a lot of information, though it's largely framed as gossip. He's also spent a lot of time considering how to make Runeforge weapons, since he wants to outfit conjured minions with them and conquer the Runeforge someday. Eventually, he'll get around to it, probably, potentially. The PCs can also find this information in his spellbook, so it's no big loss if they just kill him. A mixture of the 4 humors in here is the reagent for his location. And now we're done with the Festering Maze. If your PCs head here early, it's a good way to point them to where they need to go for runeforging reagents, since Jordomandus kept pretty good notes on what's needed there. Later on, it mostly serves as additional EXP and treasure, as well as a little bit of intel on unexplored places, or confirmation that the PCs may or may not have missed something. With this one down, we move to our final wing of the adventure, Part 9, the Halls of Wrath. The Halls of Wrath are the most isolated area of the Runeforge for 2 reasons. The first is that the people here are angry jerks that don't want to talk to anybody. The other reason is the lack of halls in the Halls of Wrath. All the rooms are accessed via teleporters, which were created by the Halls of Sloth during Thassalon's time. This does make a degree of sense. Wrath magic is evocation, fireballs and lightning bolts. Having isolated chambers prevents a lot of accidents, as well as a lot of quote-unquote accidents. Unlike every other hall we've talked about, Wrath actually had a stable population. When Thassalon first fell, the Wrath Hall simply continued on as it had. However, a few generations of inbreeding started causing issues, so those in charge molded the halls into a highly controlled society. Each generation is born roughly at the same time, and flesh-warping magic is used to remove any issues resulting from the shallow gene pool. These children are raised and trained from birth, and at age 24 are allowed to breed, siring the generation that will come after them. At this point, one of their own would have been chosen to lead the hall as the High Lord of Wrath. That person would lead their generation until they became 44. At this point, all the humans in that generation are flesh-warped into sin spawn, and then eventually they die. The denizens of Wrath are highly militant and remain on alert for the day they may leave the Runeforge and serve as Elasnist's army once more. This would have made them one of the most dangerous factions in the Runeforge, but the recent skirmish has significantly thinned their numbers. The current generation of humans are still a few years from their breeding age and might not have the numbers to sustain themselves long term. Their current project, therefore, is finding a way to reverse the sin spawn transformation to increase their human population until they have stable numbers again. It's not going well. High Lady Athroxus is eager to rebuild her numbers, as the Runeforge pool reactivating has made her think that the time for leaving the Runeforge is coming soon. But before the PCs can deal with any of that, they have to get into the halls proper. The first room is a receiving area watched over by a large archer construct. Now obviously that's going to come to life, right? The 12-foot tall statue can walk on air freely and fire arrows of fire, ice, and lightning. Disturb not its harmony lest this titan wreak destruction on the room in which you clash. The construct will set off alarms throughout the hall when activated, and the High Lord will immediately use magic to watch the fight, so the PCs aren't likely to have much of an element of surprise here. Once past the statue, the PCs will find the first teleportation circle. These circles are simple. They go one way and activate simply by stepping into them. The PCs can figure out what they do by examination, but only find out where they go by trying them. The teleport here leads to this room, which serves as a barracks and training hall for the Rathians. The people here don't need to eat or sleep, but keep up a schedule that includes these activities as a way to prepare for the day they'll have to actually do those when they leave the hall. A dozen combatants are located here, an even mix of human and synth spawn. The PCs represent the exact kind of thing they've spent generations training to fight, so all combatants here will battle to the death. Once the fighting ends, the PCs can use the teleporters on the right and left side of the training hall. The left side teleporter leads to a flesh warping lab. This is where the synth spawn are made, and where the 9 remaining humans work hard to find out how to undo the process. This hasn't been going very well, and in fact may be impossible, but they're still early on in the process, so they have no idea. Frustrated with the lack of progress though, they'll relish the idea of fighting and killing the PCs. They see protecting the lab as paramount and will fight to the death. Once the PCs clear this lab, they have effectively wiped out the entire Halls of Wrath. This last room is where the High Lord awaits. The ceiling here is made of fire and actually crucial if the PCs want the reagent from this wing, since it's the ash from anything burned in that fire. Also of note is the large Sihedron rune on the ground. This serves 2 functions, though the current High Lady can only use one of them. This first function is the summoning of an outsider that is bound to the summoner's will. The High Lady has used it to summon a Glabrizu to help her put down the PCs. Being an aggressive and not fully rational person, High Lady Athroxus will charge into battle with the PCs almost immediately. Now let's get to the most ironic bit of this adventure. The second use of that Sihedron? It can make a portal out of the Runeforge. Any teleportation effect used within the rune activates a stable portal to the Sihedron Circle on Rimeskull. This is a 2-way portal that remains active for 1 hour. But the thing is, teleportation magic is associated with the historical spell school of Conjuration, and that's one of Wrath's 2 opposed schools. So by design, no one in this ring can cast the spell to activate the portal out. And because they're all insular and unwilling to work with others, no one else can get in here to do that either. I find this hilariously ironic, but this is important because it's one of the easiest ways out of the Runeforge. Since the entry portal the PCs used closes quickly, they will likely need to come here if they don't have an inherent magical way out. A few other items in the Runeforge can also help the PCs to get back out, but before they leave, they should probably get around to making those Runeforge weapons we've been going on and on about. Part 10. Weapons of Power. This part can happen at any point after the PCs get the components they need to make a dominant Runeforge weapon. That's the one that affects greed, by the way. The PCs can turn any already magic weapons into dominant weapons simply by placing the reagents from Pride and Lust into the Runeforge pool along with their weapons. The Runeforge pool has enough charges to functionally enchant all the PC's main weapons so long as they don't go crazy. It's about a 6-weapon limit. However, after the first one, there's a bit of a complication. Since Karzoug's Awakening is what kickstarted the Runeforge pool, he's got enough of a connection to feel it being used to make a specifically anti-Karzoug weapon. So after the first weapon is enchanted, the PCs learn just how the Runelords communicated with their subordinates. A blast of light shoots from the Runeforge pool into the statue of Karzoug, bringing it to life. The same voice the PCs heard from Makmurian once again speaks. He'll keep it short and sweet, a few threats and "you'll all die here's" before sending his construct to attack them. He can only keep this up for 4 rounds, so if the fight hits round 5, the construct deactivates with a final taunt, telling the PCs to come to their deaths atop Mahar Masif. And there you go, that's book 5. It definitely presents something different from the previous 4. In some ways that's good, variety is usually appreciated, but it also has to be thematically appropriate variety. If you eat chips and salsa, then a nacho plate, and then some enchiladas, it's gonna seem really weird to get sushi as your next course. It might be tasty sushi, sure, but it's gonna bring up questions and probably confuse people. The long nature of this place does also run the risk of having "when are we gonna get to the fireworks factory" setting in for the PCs. The ending also feels abrupt since it doesn't have anything to do with getting out. Feel free to have Karzoug's actions open a temporary portal out if the PCs are just done here, if you want to have something more conclusive feeling. Ideally, you'll then want to herd them back to Sandpoint, since that's where the next part begins. This book is also a lot more self-directed, with few clues very spread out. Imagine, for example, the PCs check the Abjurant halls and then the Wrath halls first. There's not a whole lot in either of them to direct the players towards their actual objective. The PCs are also getting to the level where combat starts getting longer, and there's more potential for things to turn poorly with a few bad rolls. I do think it does a good job making some interesting fights out of each flavor of Sin Wizard though, and getting specific magic to counter a powerful villain is a staple of fantasy. If there's one improvement I'd make, it'd be to introduce an item we're going to find in the next book. Each Runelord had a specific weapon made for their champion. I talked about them in the Thassalon video. Most are out in the world, but I think it would have been interesting for the PCs to find the Greed one here, or maybe like a backup or prototype of it. Give the PCs a chance to spend time with a corrupting artifact sword loyal to Karzoug. That could be fun. But what we got is still fine. And now that we've covered it, we have one more book remaining. When we come back, it's time to finally bring the battle to Karzoug in Book 6, Spires of Zin Shalast. Thank you so much for watching, Pathfinders. What was your favorite wing of the Runeforge? I'm actually partial to the Gluttony one, with Pride and Lust kinda tied for second. Are you ready to be done with Runelords? Is there anything from this series so far that you want to hear more on? How about a post-mortem of sorts? Let me know in the comments below. Do all those other YouTube things while you're down there, and check out the Patreon as well. Even $1 goes a long way. Until next time, Pathfinders, explore, report, and cooperate.